So I'm excited to introduce our third panel. Again, we've got two panels left for two more half-an-hour sessions and then the conversation part at the end. So thank you for those just joining us, and thank you for those who've been with us all day long. As Kathy Ann Davidson explains, the traditional education structures began in the 19th century as a way to both train and indoctrinate learners, right? So children who are traditionally farm workers into being these sort of obedient factory workers, responding to authority, unquestionably following directions, following in line with whoever was at the front of the room. And she pointed out in a lecture about how even our classroom spaces and those old factory spaces, they had the same kind of direction with bells that sort of trained us to respond in different ways. And this is often counterintuitive to what our education advertises, right? So it's against that idea of social mobility, equality, anti-racism, which allows our individuals to be co-producers of knowledge. So in our liberatory teaching panel, you'll hear about some strategies and approaches that faculty members have taken to disrupt these traditional hierarchies of authority, from approaches that decenter authority, moving away from that idea of the sage on the stage, to lifting student agency and practicing transparent teaching in a culturally responsive manner. So again, we'll have about 15-20 minutes of presenters and then a time at the end for a dialogue with each of you. And I liked Eileen's way of who our panelists will go in the order, which is Danielle, Carrie, May, and Yaron. And before you speak, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and what you're teaching. And so we'll start off with Danielle.
Hi everyone, Yaktunal, Nahaninami Daniel, Nanotoka Daniel, Notzomkiska Bermudez, Niewa Merced. So my name is Danielle Bermudez. I'm a graduate student at UC Merced. My pronouns are she, her, hers, ella in Spanish, or yaha if you speak Nahuatl. And a little bit about myself. I'm in the Interdisciplinary Humanities program at UC Merced. I'm a graduate student, and my family is from El Salvador and Puerto Rico. And so something that, in terms of thinking about liberatory teaching and talking about Freire, as Sam mentioned, right? I think a lot about the experiences of my family, and I take that into the classroom. And I also believe Tawanda spoke about this really beautifully earlier. My grandpa owned a small lumber shop in El Salvador. My grandma was an elementary school teacher. But they had to flee the war in El Salvador when my mother was 16 years old. So I grew up as a child of immigrants in the US. My grandfather, when he came here, worked as a janitor at UC Berkeley, and later passed away from cancer. But he would always tell us that he envisioned one day one of his family members could attain a UC education and walk those halls of where he used to clean those halls. And I think about that humbly when I come in to teach in the classroom. I'm thinking a lot about what it means and what is at stake in our world, right? When I think about the value of studies like feminist studies and queer studies, Latin American studies, Caribbean studies, Central American studies, critical race and ethnic studies, indigenous studies, I think about acknowledging those kinds of oppressions, naming them, knowing the power, positionality, and privilege I bring into the classroom when I do have power, when I don't have power, and who we can always pass the mic to share that power, right? And so I think about this a lot with my students this semester. The last 3 semesters, I've been lucky enough to teach Spanish 1. And while that's not quite my field, I study a lot about state violence and the impact that massacre has had on Indigenous communities in El Salvador. I feel, right, understanding how Spanish, despite being a colonial language for Indigenous communities in El Salvador, is very marginalized in the US, right? And so I ask my students in the classroom, how can we envision a Spanish that rethinks about the colonial notions of being correct in a language? A lot of students speak about that fear of making a mistake or not knowing the best way to put accents or the grammar. And I think this is something that we spoke a lot about as I was trying to teach the Spanish 1 class, thinking about different kinds and multiple kinds of Spanish. Is just like in English, we have many ways of saying perhaps one word or expressing a thought or an action. And so I believe that when we think about liberatory teaching and dreaming about what freedom means, what abolition means, how we can bring those identities and community cultural wealth in the classroom, I think about the works of like Tuhi Y. Smith, who talks about reaffirming love and humanity for Indigenous communities. I think about imagining otherwise. I think about this beautiful quote that Bell Hooks has said in Teaching to Transgress, and several authors like Audre Lorde, who says, "I'm grateful to the many women and men who dare to create theory from a location of pain and struggle, who courageously expose wounds and give us their experience to teach and guide as a means to chart new theoretical journeys, and that this work is liberatory." And I think about those things when we're speaking about a language and we're thinking about how best to teach them the rigors of the language, but also thinking about what they bring as experts of their own experiences with their family members, who some of them may be heritage speakers. And maybe they say wawa instead of el autobús. Maybe they say words in different ways, or they've spoken Spanish in different ways in their communities. And I think affirming that experience and sharing about those experiences, I think that is so important in the classroom. And that's something I tried to really emphasize is how do you speak it in your home, and what can we learn from each other of thinking about Spanish, not just as the one correct way to speak Spanish, Spanish from Spain, but how can we expand that kind of knowledge and that community cultural wealth? And I think I'm out of time, but thank you all. Kiali.
Thank you, Danielle. Carrie.
Hello, everybody. My name is Carrie Menke. I'm an associate teaching professor in physics. I've been at UC Merced since 2008. Over the years, I have learned a lot. My teaching, my perspectives have changed a lot. And I've tried to have my classes, and mostly they're introductory physics classes, be inclusive and just reach all the students that are there. And what I had is, I used to have a set course structure, and with this perspective of the instructor as the expert. And so I was like the guide, and I put so much effort into trying to make an inclusive environment. And I didn't really recognize how it was furthering this hierarchical approach. And so then COVID happened. We had to go to remote teaching. And after over a decade of figuring things out and feeling like I knew what was best for my students, there were unknown student needs. It was an unknown learning environment, at least to me. And I honestly freaked out. And I was scrambling to figure out what kind of course structure would allow students that have to work and have to participate asynchronously not be at a disadvantage for the students that were able to attend. And I finally came up to, I don't know, I need to ask the students. And so on the first day of class, I said, this is something that I've never done before, is I have this idea of a course structure. Will it work for you? What do you need? And it turned into a really collective effort. I felt like in the true sense, I was a team leader, but it was together that we were figuring it out. And the students, it's so easy for faculty to discount students, like, oh, student evaluations are biased. Students don't know what they're talking about, in terms of, they don't know what good education looks like. And there are some things that students can't really judge or determine or speak knowledgeably about in terms of, if a certain level of curriculum is appropriate, but they do understand where they come from and how the class will impact them. And it's something that I will actually bring into all of my future classes, and I'm looking forward to going back face to face. And I didn't realize how powerful it was, and really how unintentionally invested I was in the hierarchical structure of the university until participating in these reflections on anti-racist pedagogy. And so first 1.5 weeks of the semester, I had this draft syllabus, and here's just a little screenshot of it. And I told the students, I'm like, so these are the common course components. You have to practice. I want you to come to lecture and engage. We use Sapling for homework. And progress checks, it was my attempt at a formative type of assessment, kind of coaching rather than summative, which is after the fact. And I had some new ideas, and we talked about it in the very first class. And I said, I want to know your thoughts, concerns about it. And so we collaborated on this via a CAT courses discussion board. And so everybody had an opportunity to participate in it asynchronously as well. And then I had different lecture prep assignments. And so I used CAT courses quizzes. And that was a way to not only get more people's feedback in case they weren't aware of the discussion board, but also for them to vote on what it was. And you can see in the screenshot that some things are marked out, and that was edits based on discussion. Students were able to recognize, well, if we're doing these progress checks on top of the quizzes, isn't that kind of doing double duty? Isn't that kind of redundant? I'm like, you're absolutely right. And they felt like they were going to be more engaged in the lecture prep and participation. And so we changed those percentages. It was so refreshing and fascinating to me how engaged students were. And so I'm so excited about it, and will absolutely incorporate this and look for ways, additional ways to incorporate students into putting the course together. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. Our next presenter is May.
Hi, everyone. I'm May Saturn, and I'm an assistant professor in the history, critical race, and ethnic studies at UC Merced. And I am trained as an Africanist historian. I've always come to this teaching with this complex. You see, I've always been aware, obviously, of the fact that I'm not African, nor am I Black. So, and students walk into my classroom assuming that I'm one, they don't want to be in my classroom because I can't teach the subject matter, or two, I'm just, different, quite different. I don't fit in these boxes. So I've approached my classes with this understanding that I am not and don't want to be, even if I have the PhD after my name, the expert. And so immediately when we went to the distance learning and the semester, I was the end of the spring semester, and I'm thinking about the semester before going into this semester, just thinking about how I want to teach this brand new class. And the class I was teaching was on mobility and migration in Africa. And it's a class that I was really excited about teaching, just because I'm thinking, okay, this is going to help me with my own research project, right? And it will engage my thinking. And so I wanted to, and I knew that I was going to flip the classroom, right? I wanted to make it so that I would be able to not only, decenter myself, but make myself less accountable as being the authority figure when I'm lecturing, because there's a difference. And I think those of us who teach understand that when you're up there lecturing, there's this difference that your students kind of place on you, whether you are approachable or not. And so I wanted to make that clear in this notion of having the lectures recorded. Granted, it was a huge learning curve, and I might not be the most expert in in editing my videos, but I can pretty much do a very simple editing job now. But that liberated me in a way that I didn't think about when I thought, well, how can I make it really easier for everyone involved, and my students, and thinking about and being empathetic about where they're coming from in the context of COVID, right? And Carrie mentioned the idea of our students working or just having more responsibilities. And so I thought that making a commitment to record my lectures and allowing my students to view the lectures whenever they wanted to, and then when we did meet, devoting that time not to the material so much as that I covered in class, but really checking in first and foremost, and then talking with them about the muddiest points that they came across during their readings, during the lectures. And I didn't have, these quizzes or even a final or a midterm, but more reflections, right? I worked quite a bit with the teaching center to really, because it was my first time teaching really online courses, to kind of incorporate discussion boards and really try to gauge what my students were thinking about the flipped classroom and the materials that was covering there. So that made me once again feel like, being aware that I was decentering myself and not making myself the expert, but also it showed what I thought was straightforward was it not straightforward when I read the feedback that I had my students give me, right? It was 2 questions I would have my students respond to in their discussion post. And the second question was always, what was the clearest point and what was the muddiest point? And some things that I thought was straightforward. So in thinking about this and moving forward, I will, think about how I can be mindful of what I thought was clear and what I thought needed work on. So that's what I learned this semester doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And our last speaker is Yuran.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yiran Xu. I just joined UC Merced this spring as Assistant Professor of Writing Studies. Super excited to be here. This semester, I taught a first-year writing class. And today I'm going to talk about how I use collectively constructed reading materials that echo students' interest in this writing class. So one of the challenges in first-year writing class is to accommodate the needs of students with diverse personal and academic backgrounds, and also scaffold each of them to work on a research project that truly interests them, or a project they can simply carry along to their future major studies. So when designing this writing class, I had the idea that my students would not just mechanically write the papers for me or for this class, but for themselves. So they own their writing and their research projects. So I'm just there to help them achieve their goals. So I use a content-based approach to writing and organize the course around the topic of COVID-19 and its impact on the marginalized community. So in this writing class, the reading materials are highly driven by students' personal and research interests. So basically, I shared a tentative syllabus at the beginning of the course so that students know the general expectations and topics we might cover throughout the semester. And as the semester evolves, I added or changed readings based on the students' interests that emerge from student survey, class conversation, or from their informal or formal writings. I sometimes also included readings that students cited in their paper, which usually surprises the students and better motivated them to incorporate more high quality sources into their research paper. Also try to strike a balance and when selecting those readings, so each students feel like their research topic or personal interests are being valued and seen in this class. So everyone get a chance to shine and get excited. So by the end of the semester, not surprisingly, the course materials look quite different from what I had planned at the beginning. Students were able to share their research with their classmates, actually in 4 conference-style presentations, like panels, like what we are doing now. So they focus on different aspects of impact of COVID-19, such as areas in education, art, health technology, business, economy. And they were able to interact with the audience as an expert in an area they are comfortable and they are confident. So I just wanted to share some of the students' quotes in a semester reflection. So one of the students wrote, being able to pick something that interests me and write about, it has definitely changed my perspective on writing. Another student wrote, the whole time I have been in school, approximately 14 years, I never enjoyed writing because I believed I was not good at it. It was one of the things I least enjoyed doing. And I realized that it was not writing itself that I did not like. It was the topics I was obliged to do so in school. So I will stop here, and thank you so much for the wonderful opportunity to share and exchange ideas.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing those approaches and strategies in our liberatory teaching. Do we have questions or comments from the audience or from panelists to each other? We've got about 10 minutes, which is nice.
Yaron, did you find that because they were engaged with the topic, they actually wrote better, or were they just more engaged with the material?
I think they are, they will definitely write better when they are more engaged with the materials, because if they don't have enough input while writing about their research project, they won't able to incorporate enough sources into their writing. Because one of the challenges students had is like, I don't know what to write about. I don't have enough content to write about. So when they can read something that interests them and relevant to their majors or personal interests, they are definitely more invested in the reading. If they are just assigned to read something that are kind of not relevant to them, especially in the first year general education class, they are likely just to, discard the reading or just like do like, ignore that. So definitely find there's a link between, like in the reading and the quality of their paper.
Thanks.
Provost Catfield has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Carrie, I really appreciate your candor in talking about your investment, or you didn't know how invested you were in the hierarchy. But when you think about it, we've got this extremely hierarchical system that is supposed to, if you're on a tenure track and you get tenured, you're supposed to be free. But to get there, you have to conform completely. I think it's absurd that we expect people who've been cultivated to conform to suddenly become creative and free once they have that protection. And then, as you also said it, Carrie, how many young faculty we have here who are taking real risks. I applaud that. This is just phenomenal to see. I thank you for your, the hierarchy doesn't vanish tenure either. David, you're absolutely right. It keeps on going. But that's the point, right? It's a system that keeps us always stretching to please somebody for us to climb the ladder, rather than to be thinking about whether that ladder even goes somewhere we want to go. So I really appreciate this, this liberatory moment here. It's really powerful. And if we can maintain that, if we can cultivate it for you, so you can keep that on the way, we'll have done our job.
One thing that has really helped me grow and become aware of these things is by talking with different faculty, different people, staff, the students, the graduate students, postdocs, and the Reflections on Anti-Racist Pedagogy was an excellent vehicle for that. So thank you, Sam and Eileen, for that.
I got a whole bunch of hands that went up. Tawanda.
Yes, I think I'm there. You can hear me, correct? There we go. He lives. My question is kind of like around frameworks, kind of like cultural frameworks around hierarchy. As we think about hierarchy, I'm curious about how our panelists may have thought or might consider the idea of shifting the framework of what hierarchy is. My thought being that the negative association to hierarchy has a lot to do with, neo-capitalist, militarist, technocratic frameworks that we live in culturally and currently. And I'm curious if people have had any success finding models of hierarchy that are culturally relevant to students and therefore sustainable and not negative. An example is basically sometimes people find me weird because I'm from Zimbabwe and everyone's family based on age. So I basically relate. Hierarchy for me is if you're a little older, yes, there's respect and so forth and behaviors that go with that without subservience or negativity. So I'm just curious if anybody's kind of thought through different models of hierarchy, outside of the system we're working in. Sorry.
That's a great question. Yeah, Carrie.
In a little bit, I think I've tried to think of my teaching more as like, here are some tips and tricks that work for me, and these, just because they work for me doesn't necessarily mean they'll work for you. And here are some different resources, like these videos are really good. But the goal is to understand the material and to make it our own. And it can be a little bit hard in physics, where it's a mathematical, like mathematics is often said is the language. And so kind of that kind of guiding part, without being offended that there are other guides, other explanations that work better for students, other explanations that are just more clearer than mine. But I'm also, that's a fantastic question. I'm also interested in what others have to say.
I think, I echo that. That's a fantastic question. I think the luxury of being for me in the humanities and teaching history is that there's not that, 1 + 1 = 2, right? That we push back against and to think and to encourage my students to critically think and question what is being presented to you. And then, that's critical thinking skills, right? So I kind of have that luxury to be like, okay, well, yeah, that person might be an expert, but what do you think? What types of questions are you asking that might allow us to think about this document or see this society or this historical process in a different light that may not be the quote, right way to think about it, but then let's move that out of the binary of right and wrong out of the window, because we have that luxury to be inquisitive. So I don't, but that's a fantastic question, and it's something that I certainly probably will ponder upon moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm thinking about, so my background is in creative writing, and, we teach in a short story world, the Aristotelian plot structure, right? Rising action, climax, falling action. And I often think it's like when we're thinking of those other models of hierarchy and structures, like you can unpack them, right? You can think about like, that's a very male centered, single climax way of telling a story versus like a female version, which is cyclical and potentially has multiple climaxes, right? There's like different ways of thinking. I heard someone else say that, and I think like bringing those types of things into conversations might get students also thinking about that question through different lenses, and maybe that's one of those ways they can offer us ways of thinking. Alo, I think it's Alo, you've had your hand up for a minute for our last question.
Well, I'm actually not faculty, but just to add on to this, I have worked with a lot of faculty, and I appreciate all of you for being this vulnerable and being willing to like mold yourselves to us as students. I think that's very important, and attacking this hierarchy, because it honestly starts with you, like individually in your classrooms. You never know who you have in that classroom with you. Like, you never know who you can motivate, and they can change the world. So, and also being easy on yourselves. Like, we all know that it's very hard to dismantle this, but just also telling your students, take a break when you need to. You can only do so much. You can't take care of the world if you can't take care of yourself. So, if you take 5 seconds in the beginning of your class to be like, hey, or even to acknowledge one thing that happened outside in the world, like, hey, this one thing is happening, a lot of you could be affected by it. We're going to take these 5 seconds, breathe in for 5 seconds, and although we're going to be in this space now, shifting our attention to what our learning material is or whatever, but still acknowledging these things can be affecting you and your performance, but it can be done. And just those 5 seconds will completely change the course of how that student perceives the new information coming into them.
Thank you so much for that closing comment. Felt like a good fitting closing comment for us today. And thank you again to our panelists. And again, I'll clap for everybody, but I'm imagining everyone clapping in their homes. And we'll shift to our final panel of the day.